everyone, welcome back to Jay's Office Hours. This is Jaye Wells. I'm the USA Today Bestselling author of the Sabina Cain series. I also wrote the Prosperous War series and a bunch of other stuff. Most of my books involve magic and world building, and I am a kind of famous for being a pantser. It's something that I talk a lot about. It's something that I teach a lot about. And I was thinking today about the idea that I think a lot of plotters have, that a pantser just sort of sits down at the desk and they just start typing, and then eventually they have a story. But what I've actually found is it works a little bit differently. Whereas a plotter might sit down and come up with an outline and sort of figure out world building and things like that as they're outlining the story, and then they go and write it. What I do as a pantser is I have a pretty extensive pre-writing ritual where I'm learning about the world and the characters. And so what I'm basically doing is creating my sandbox so that when I sit down and start pantsing my story, I already know a lot about the people and the world that I'm writing. And I think the best analogy for that I've ever heard was in Twyla Tharp's wonderful, wonderful book, The Creative Habit, which is when she starts, she's of course this very famous choreographer, and when she started a new piece, she would go to the office supply store and she would get a plain cardboard box, one of those white ones, you know, a file box, and the first thing she would do is she would write down an intention for the piece that she was working on, or a goal or a theme, and she'd put that in the box. And then she would start filling it with movies, soundtracks, images, costumes, just everything she ran across as she was exploring the idea of this piece. And a lot of this happened before she even choreographed a single dance move. And it was a way that she sort of collected all of her ideas in one box. And I think that is very similar to how I start writing a book, except instead of having a white box, I create like a box in my head for the project. And when I am reading books, when I am watching movies and looking up images and brainstorming ideas, I'm sort of just filling up this box with possibilities for my story. Now, in addition to the sort of file I create in my head, I also do things like create Pinterest boards with lots of images and articles related to the project. I sometimes create actual collages. I'll create playlists. And this is how I create my stories, is I sit down and write about characters that I know pretty well and the world that I know pretty well before I even sit down to write a single scene. I just don't plot out what they're going to do before I sit down to write it. I think that is a really important thing to remember, is that at the beginning of your story, it's a really good idea to sort of just leave yourself open to new possibilities, because oftentimes our first idea when it comes to a story isn't our strongest. And the better that we know the world and the characters, we learn, you know, what the story of this particular place and these particular people is going to be. Because you want a story to feel like it could only happen here, now, to these particular people. And the better you know them, and the better you know the world that they live in, and how that world influenced who they have become and how they impact the world that they live in, the stronger your story will be. For example, it's a little different when you're working on a long-running series like I am. I'm working on the Prosperous War series right now, and today I started researching book 5. I don't have a title for it yet, but I do know that the alchemical stage that this book will be based around is the alchemical stage of fermentation, which is the 5th stage of alchemy. So I spent most of my day today reading through all of my extensive alchemy library that I've amassed while writing this series, reading up on the fermentation stage and the associated symbols, the myths that sort of are associated with it, the psychological associations, and looking at pictures online and just sort of starting to explore the idea of this stage of alchemy. And I've already had a couple of ideas of things that could happen. And some of that is because I mean, it's the 5th book in the series. I know who these characters are. I know what happened in the last book. I know what I'm working towards a little bit. So some things just sort of are natural. I know some things are coming. But when it comes to like the crime that's committed and how that ties into the overall theme of the book, I'm just sort of exploring possibilities right now. And honestly, this is one of my favorite parts of the writing process, because right now everything is potential. I haven't made any hard decisions, because the thing is, once you start making decisions about your story, it impacts everything. And if I, for example, on the first day I started researching the book, decided, well, X is going to happen, then in my mind, X is happening no matter what. And it makes it harder for me to deviate from that plan if new options come up as I'm working on the story or as I learn more things about the alchemical process. And a lot of that has to do with me knowing how my brain processes story. And that has come from writing a lot of books. This book that I'm starting to research is my 13th novel. And it also comes from the fact that I have spent probably the last decade reading everything I could get my hands on the writing process and the psychology of writing and the creative, different approaches to creativity. And I consider, I have an MFA in writing popular fiction, but I still read every craft book that comes out because I'm a lifelong learner in this craft. And so I would encourage you, in addition to sort of exploring all the possibilities in your story, also exploring all the possibilities when it comes to how you approach your craft. I mean, even though I pretty much know how I process a story now, I still try new things all the time, and I'm still picking up new tricks. So I guess the overall theme of this talk is be open. The more you're open to the ideas, the more ideas you put into your head, it sort of becomes like a magic 8-ball. And then, when you run into a problem and you're shaken up a little bit, and a solution comes to you because you know a bunch of types of solutions and a bunch of possibilities that you can use. So that's my lesson for today. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you haven't checked out my books, be sure and check out www.jaywells.com. You can find my complete book list there. You can find other articles on craft of writing and the life of writing. And you can also find out where I'm going to be, which cons I'm attending, and I hope you'll check it out. Please, if you liked this video, please go ahead and subscribe to my channel so you never miss one. Thanks, and happy writing.